Are you struggling to change a behavior? Harm reduction can help you. Harm reduction is a set of practical strategies and ideas that can reduce harmful behaviors. In supporting people to gain access to the tools to support healthier living, we're also recognizing their competency to protect themselves, their families, and their communities. Most of the time, harm reduction is only talked about in the context of drug use. And I've found that it's incredibly helpful with any difficult behaviors that I'm trying to change. And I've used it for decades, helping people to change their own harmful behaviors. So today, I want to talk about how harm reduction can help you change any behavior. Harm reduction upholds the dignity and the human rights of drug users, but also we're thinking about this as work of love. Stigma doesn't have a place here. Laura Guzman, NHRC. My friend Laura, she said that and posted it on Facebook and inspired this whole episode. And thank you, Laura, for inspiring me. And while I do want to talk generally about harm reduction, I also want to talk specifically about using harm reduction to address drug abuse because it's a growing problem. As I was mentioning in the interview with Abby on Tuesday, it's out of control. And I've been working in this field since the 80s. I lived through the crack epidemic, but I still feel like right now it's worse than ever. And we really need to start pushing for more effective care for people who are addicted to drugs. And I offer it as a general intervention for those of us who have stopped using drugs, because from my experience, what happens when you stop using drugs is that your addictive nature just goes somewhere else. It just finds another place. Like I quit drinking and using illicit drugs when I was 22. Then I went deep into codependent behaviors, which are also very addictive. And I was in one abusive relationship after another. And even my friendships were very exploitative. So I threw myself into the addiction of codependency. And then I threw myself into the addiction of workaholism. And then I threw myself into a really deep food addiction. And all this time, I held on to my cigarette addiction. I smoked from when I was 9 till I was 52. So my point is that for those of us who are still struggling with our drug or alcohol use, please, use the harm reduction materials you find out there as is. But for those of you who are addressing other addictive behaviors, uh, make good use of the general meaning of harm reduction, because in my experience, it helps more than anything else. These principles are sound, and I have seen them work for decades. So this is the website of the National Harm Reduction Coalition that I mentioned earlier. And I will put a link in the video description to their website. It's chock full of good resources and information. So their definition is right here. Harm reduction is a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with drug use. Harm reduction is also a movement for social justice built on a belief in and respect for the rights of people who use drugs. And I open this up to share with you The principles. So number one, accepts for better or worse that licit and illicit drug use is part of our world and chooses to work to minimize its harmful effects rather than simply ignore or condemn them. To me, this first principle is about acceptance. We accept that drug use is part of life. We accept any addictive behavior that we're exhibiting. Like I mentioned earlier, codependency. This is a thing that is harmful. And it doesn't really matter if it's right or wrong, it just is. And it's our job to deal with it. Have you liked, shared, and subscribed yet? Please do so that we can get more word out to people that there's a safe place where they can come for comfort and coping skills and community and coaching and new ideas like harm reduction. Did you know in the city of San Francisco that only 300 people died of COVID-19 last year, but 700 died of overdose? This is a very serious problem that it's time for us to address. Number two, understands drug use as a complex, multifaceted phenomenon that encompasses a continuum of behaviors from severe use to total abstinence, and acknowledges that some ways of using drugs are clearly safer than others. Drug use or codependency or any other addictive behavior exist on a continuum from, wow, I can't believe they're still standing, to, I have no problem with that. It's really important that we recognize that there's a spectrum so we don't just lump all people together in one box of addicts or people who use drugs or codependents or workaholics. Everybody's a little different, and everybody needs to address their addictive behavior in a slightly different way. There are only guidelines here, not actual individual solutions. Number three, establishes quality of individual and community life and well-being, not necessarily cessation of all drug use, as the criteria for successful interventions and policies. Quality of life is what we look at when we're talking about success in harm reduction practice. We look and we say, has this person's quality of life improved? Has the quality of life of her family improved? Has the quality of life in her community improved? These are the things we want to look at. Number four, calls for the non-judgmental, non-coercive provision of services and resources to people who use drugs and the communities in which they live in order to assist them in reducing attendant harm. Woo, this one's important. Non-judgmental and non-coercive. These are two things you rarely see in substance abuse treatment programs. There's a whole lot of judgment and coercion going on. And these things, in my opinion, only help produce resistance in people who are trying to recover from their addictive behaviors. They rarely help. Coercion is not going to help me in any of my behavior change. Number five, ensures that people who use drugs and those with a history of drug use routinely have a real voice in the creation of programs and policies designed to serve them. So this principle is just saying that empowerment is a value in harm reduction, that people's voices who are struggling with the problem should be heard. when it comes to creating new programs or designing interventions. Always, the voices of the people most affected need to be heard. Number 6, affirms people who use drugs themselves as the primary agents of reducing the harms of their drug use and seeks to empower people who use drugs to share information and support each other in strategies which meet their actual conditions of use. To me, number 6 is an extension of number 5 in that it indicates that harm reduction seeks to empower drug users to create interventions and programs that work for them. So they're in number 6, they're saying that peer support and peer advocacy are encouraged. Recognizes that the realities of poverty, class, racism, social isolation, past trauma, sex-based discrimination, and other social inequalities affect both people's vulnerability to and capability for effectively dealing with drug-related harm. So in number 7, I feel like what they're saying is harm reduction recognizes all the intersectionalities with drug use, or if we're talking generally with other addictive behaviors, and accounts for those things when we're trying to reach out for help. Some people are more vulnerable to drug use and other addictive behaviors because of their poverty or their gender or any of these other things. Number 8, does not attempt to minimize or ignore the real and tragic harm and danger that can be associated with illicit drug use. And of course, since we're expanding the definition of harm reduction to include all addictive behaviors, it doesn't ignore the real harm of any addictive behaviors, from drug use to workaholism. All of these things are harmful to our health, and we need to stop pretending or ignoring the real harms associated with these behaviors. I feel like this is the number one problem in America today, and if we don't start addressing it, we are just doomed, all of us. But this is Hopeful Tribe. I don't ever plan on giving up on us. I think that we can make it. I think that we can recover from these addictive behaviors and be healthier as individuals, as families, as communities, as a nation. I believe we can. Now that we got through the definition of harm reduction and the principles of harm reduction, thank you for staying this long if you have. I want to get into some of the truth that I learned over the years from harm reduction. Number 1, ambivalence is natural, not pathological. When someone is severely addicted to drugs, I see the most judgment from outsiders. Let me give an example. Oh, here's an extreme example. Let's say there's a mother in a psychiatric ward because she's severely abusing methamphetamines, and a worker finds out that she has a young child in foster care. 9 times out of 10, what I've seen is incredible judgment negative judgment from the worker to this addict who's severely addicted to methamphetamines because she has a child. Let me tell you, being a mother does not make you superhuman. Just because you're a mother, just because you've given birth to a child, does not mean you're automatically immune to problems or addictions. Mothers are human beings, and drug use does not make them a bad person or a bad mother. And I am 100% sure that all of the mothers that I have known who have been drug addicts really didn't want to be using drugs. They were just highly ambivalent about it. And they couldn't get help until they encountered somebody who wasn't going to judge them or call them sick or call them bad because they were using drugs and they were a mother. Addiction is a relationship. You heard me. Addiction is a relationship. For instance, I love food. Food is there for me when no one else is. Food soothes me so quickly. Food holds me when I'm feeling lonely. That's a relationship. That's a very deep relationship. So when I started to recover from my food addiction, I had to come up with interventions that also offered relationships that were nurturing and would hold me when no one else was there. Success equals any positive change. Really, anything that improves somebody's quality of life or their family's quality of life or the quality of life in their general community is a success. Change is slow, incremental, and has setbacks. I think I mentioned this in the life coaching session with Martrice, that my experience has been that slow, incremental change is the most successful. And I learned that by practicing harm reduction with others and with myself. There's a tendency when people get tired of their addictive behaviors to go all in on their change plan and expect themselves to change A, B, and C by next Friday. And often that's unsuccessful. There have been some people who've been able to change behaviors really quickly, but it was probably just a surface change. The actual internal change that makes the change sustainable, that takes a lot longer. So change is slow, incremental, and has setbacks. Setbacks, sometimes in recovery language, are called relapses. And these are part of recovery. It's really difficult to find people who have recovered from any kind of addiction who didn't have setbacks. It's just part of recovery. It really is. And if you can accept that change is all of these three things, you're much more likely to be successful in any change process that you start. So when I was preparing for this episode, I looked up in Merriam-Webster's online dictionary the definition of love. And the fourth one seems most fitting here. Unselfish, loyal, and benevolent concern for the good of another. I like that. And harm reduction is definitely that. An unselfish, loyal, and benevolent concern for the good of another. Harm reduction is love. What's one behavior you're trying to change? Please talk about it in the comments below. And remember, if you would like some life coaching, you can go to hopefultribe.com to schedule a session, or you can email us at hopefultribe@gmail.com. Also, we have a Patreon page, and you can go there to support our channel. I'm thinking about doing a monthly group coaching session for the Patreon members, and let me know in the comments below if you'd attend if I started a group coaching call. I think it would be a lot of fun. Thanks so much for coming, Hopeful Tribe. Remember to like, share, and subscribe as far and wide as you can. Welcome home, Hopeful Tribe. I'm so glad you came.
Welcome home, you are home. Come on in, tell me where you've been. I've been waiting for you, hoping that while we're apart, you felt loved and hopeful every moment in your heart. Welcome home, you are home. Come on in, tell me how you've been.